distancing have some adverse effects just right down to the consumer demand side. For example, I think in Kenya there was some closure of many informal retailers, what they call the mama mbogas, in urban areas, and the effects of this have on large sale whole markets. And I think because of what we're seeing here, already the World Food Programme is estimating that the number of people who will be food insecure in just East Africa will rise from 20 million to potentially 34 to 43 million in 2020, driven by this increase in food security in just urban areas. And we're seeing short-term humanitarian responses that are critical and very important right now. However, again, as I called out at the beginning, I think long-term solutions are equally important to build resilience in food systems. And that's the basis of the conversation that we want to have for the rest of today, and also for some of these slides. What are the things that different actors can get into to support some of these gaps, and also for the different appliances that we're working with? So for the next couple of slides, I'm going to share more on what we've seen in the market from pilots that we've run either under ACE and some other programs that we are working on as Open Capital. So primarily, we've seen a lot more traction with solar water pumping, which is not a shock here for anyone involved in this space. Solar milling on the agro-processing side, and then for storage, a lot more on cooling and refrigeration. There's, of course, a lot of opportunity on the solar water pumping side, and we've already seen increased or accelerated sales and growth in that space, and there's a lot of opportunity to further support it, given the impact it could have on increasing productivity and over-reliance on, rain-fed agriculture, but also the potential impact it can have on access to water for families and so on. On the milling side, again, not surprising. I think I've had so many conversations with people in the energy space and agriculture space as well, equally talking about how to tap into this, because this is across Africa. This is a key part. Agro-processing is one of those key parts we're thinking about in terms of economic growth. So reducing the need for aggregation and transportation, agro-processing is key. And then on the solar cooling and fridges for refrigeration. So I'll just move on quickly. I think Shibukem is about to tell me I'm spending too much time. Next slide, Victor. So from what we've seen from our pilots, I'm just share. These are just a couple of the challenges we've seen, and I'm sure a number of the other panelists are going to share more. Is one, there's low affordability and willingness to pay. Despite increases in efficiency for cost in the solar space, it still has really high upfront costs. And then customers are also still in the process of innovating. I would say companies are still innovating and trying to tailor their products to what's happening with different customers, especially because farmer needs are so different. And because of that, for some, it feels like a luxury good. In other situations, that customization still is making it quite expensive. And then in some cases, it's really not, it hasn't yet quite gotten to the peak part that makes it as relevant to farmers to make it very profitable. For example, in pilots that we've seen for us as we were working in Uganda, showed small-scale mills were producing a maximum capacity of just 300 kgs per day, while the diesel mills were at 1,000. So there's still a lot of opportunity there for innovation to be able to get to that level of productivity. I'm okay to move to the next slide. The next issue that we've seen is, of course, limited access to finance, which we're going to discuss, and then consumer awareness and market spoilage. So I think we're going to discuss a number of the other issues throughout this, and I'm happy to share. I think the brief that we put together for this is available on the A-Staff website, but just wanted to kind of set the tone with that brief description.
Thank you so much, Chris. Well, I know there's like a wealth of information there, and I know I don't want to rush in terms of not sharing everything. But then, yeah, I'm just going to move on to Rebecca Shirley. Hi, Rebecca, are you there?
Hi, Jipkam, can you hear me?
Yep. Yes,
can you hear me?
Great, yeah.
Great, good. Yeah, Thanks for having me. I'll just say a little bit about Power for All. I know that we are already running a bit short on time. But for those of you who are not familiar, Power for All is a global organization aimed at accelerating universal energy access through advancing integration of decentralized renewable energy technologies. So we work through market activation, advocacy, and awareness raising to sort of challenge the business as usual approach to energy service delivery. We have a coalition of over 300 partners, and essentially we help to unify the voice of those partners and the sector at large to mobilize the sector and to create action. And we have a strong focus on research and data synthesis as a key vehicle for raising awareness for these integration opportunities. So that's where I come in as our Chief of Research. To the topic of the webinar today, I guess it doesn't have to be said that the current pandemic and of course the impact of climate change on Africa's already rain-fed led agricultural sector just deepens the growing crisis around food security and also compounds the employment challenge. So basically, Power for All in 2019 launched a campaign called Powering Agriculture with support from the Dune Foundation to answer the question of how leveraging decentralized renewable technologies could actually contribute to agricultural productivity and therefore also support job creation and food security at the same time. I think there's a lot of research on this question, but the question really lies in how exactly to do that. I'll just say a little bit about what the Powering Agriculture campaign is about and what it's done so far, and then we can, in the remainder of your questions, to become getting to some of our policy recommendations and so on. But essentially, in close collaboration with organizations such as IFPRI, FAO, AGRA, MAMO Panel, WRI, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, we're basically implementing this campaign through a combination of research and knowledge and advocacy and communication with three goals. One is to coordinate a collaborated effort for influencing global and regional agriculture and food institutions to champion decentralized energy technologies such as standalone solar as engines for improved agricultural productivity. Second is to build an evidence-based case for the increased role that decentralized technologies can have in scaling agriculture. And third, to engage in national agricultural policy and finance shifting of the policy. And we're working specifically in Uganda for that. So to date, what we've seen is more than 25 key institutions are now supporting the Powering Agriculture campaign. Our media coverage resulting directly from this work has generated a readership of over 4.6 million just in 2020 alone, and a noticeable increase in social media mentions for Powering Agriculture. And the work of the campaign has already been featured in top-tier outlets such as, the World Economic Forum, Brookings, Economic Times, CNBC Africa, and so on. Aside from raising the profile of this issue that we're talking about today, this intersection between agriculture and energy, we've also been able to connect a body of research institutions that work in these periphery areas together to help leverage the data that does exist for policy. So I'll talk a little bit more as we continue about what that research has shown. But suffice to say, some of our partners have been the World Bank, SMAP, IRENA, IFPRI, RLI, WRI, and so on. So that's just to give you an overview to become of what we're doing with the Powering Ag campaign. And as we go on today, I'll talk about what we're finding in the research.
Great. Thank you very much, Rebecca. I'll hand over to you now, Manas. Over to you.
Hello. Hi, good morning, everybody. I'll just give you a quick background of where FAO, what the aims of FAO are, and how do we work on the energy side. So I think most of the participants would know FAO mainly works with the countries to ensuring that there is no food insecurity in the world and reduce malnutrition. Within that aim, where we come in from the energy side is under the program that we call the Energy Smart Food Program. And the whole idea of the Energy Smart Food Program is basically to support governments develop energy policies that are grounded in evidence and that work at the nexus between agriculture and energy sector. So what in principle, what we do is we support the countries in doing techno-economic evaluations of technologies across the food value chain with different energy technologies and trying to build evidence in terms of how those technologies can help countries achieve their targets, both the energy targets, but also the agriculture targets. So can these energy technologies increase productivity of production? So can they increase yields? And that could be by using, for example, technologies such as solar power, solar water systems, or solar water pumping systems. When you go down the food value chains, you get to the storage, there's processing, there's transport. So what we try to work with the countries is to develop evidence, identify technologies of which technologies might work in which context, at what stage of the value chain, and what targets can be achieved by them. So generally, the Energy Smart Food Program works at two interfaces. So one is the energy for agri-food chains, so where we look at how can we provide more sustainable energy to the agri-food chains. And that could be in the form of solar technologies at the production level, solar pumping, for example, but there could also be other sustainable technology. It could be biogas technologies, for example. As you go down the food value chain, these could be solar cold storages or solar processing technologies. So these in that window of work, what we focus on is how to provide more sustainable energy to the agri-food chain. The other piece of work that we also work a lot on, and we've done a lot of work with many countries, is how can we get energy from the agriculture side sustainably. So that would entail looking at crop residues or agricultural waste or livestock residues, and the idea being then to understand, is there any potential to use those wastes to produce electricity or heat and then supply it back to the agriculture side or the local rural areas where there is a lack of energy. When you look at the African context, many countries, the agri-food chain exists, but it is still very rudimentary. So there is more or less no energy consumption in the agri-food chain. So where it is, it's very rudimentary in terms of cooking. It's solid biomass. In terms of pumping, more often than not, it's rain-fed. So there's not. So farmers are not able to really manage how and when to water there, and so decentralized energy systems, for example, can play a huge role there. Again, when you go down the value chain, a lot in African countries, around 30 to 40% of the fresh produce is lost, and that is largely because there is no cold storages to keep the food, and that is a waste of resources that went into production of those food, but also causes lack of access to or product availability of food in these areas. So even if you produce a lot of food, but you cannot store it, which means it doesn't reach the people that require it the most, and that causes also a lot of undernutrition and malnutrition and lack of food availability. So generally, to wrap it up, what we really do is to work at this intersection between agriculture sector and the energy sector of countries, trying to understand their baselines, where it does stand, identify the technologies that might work, analyze what will be the techno-economic impact of it, which technologies might work, what impact would it have on the climate change, or what impact would it have on, for example, employment generation, and then go back to the governments to provide this evidence, and then hope that that evidence would inform the policies that the governments would make. And these could be policies both on the agriculture side, and they can also inform the policies on the ag side. But generally, it's always policies at the nexus of these two sectors. So this is generally where FAO comes in this space of work.
Thank you very much, Manas. Thank you. So I'm going to hand over to Michael, just briefly within 3 to 4 minutes.
Great, thank you. I'm with Simu Solar, and Simu Solar provides agricultural equipment to farmers and fishers in Tanzania and Uganda at present, including solar water pumps and solar fishing lights. So more on the production side of it. We design, finance, install, and service the solar water pumps, providing a life cycle of support to our farmer clients from half an acre up to 50 acres. So we're really trying to be the single point that any farmer can go to and have their irrigation needs met. These systems give farmers year-round water access, stabilizing their primary source of income in the face of increasingly unpredictable weather. And they increase the acreage they can cultivate, and they improve the yields per acre, and they allow them to diversify the crops they farm. So just access to consistent water alone really gives the farmer a lot greater security and a lot more flexibility in their farming practice. Operating since 2015, we work with many different manufacturers, integrating our proprietary pay-as-you-go technology to remotely manage the equipment. We do view ourselves very much as the client distributor, as a servicer, not as a developer of sort of the equipment itself. But the technology to manage it is really critical. And anyone working in this space has to evaluate the different manufacturers and really develop the supply chain, because these are fairly new types of equipment being brought to the market if you're looking at solar. And if you're not, then it tends to be a very fragmented marketplace around equipment, even for regular AC pumps. We focus on the last, I'd say, 100th mile, in that many of our clients are very far from a city center, serving the customer where no one else really is doing it. There aren't any institutions that are providing the kinds of services, the full range of services that we do to this client base. For farmers to adopt productive use equipment technologies, they really do need that. They need more than just the equipment. So with the 2-year warranty, we're providing that. We're giving them the confidence to make that first step. Over 90% of our clients depend on our financing to afford the equipment and are willing to make the investment because of our service guarantee. Even if they could afford it, if they do have the capital available, it is a very new technology for many of them, and the ability to make a small upfront investment gives them the ability to evaluate the technology firsthand and get comfortable with it. So the financing really is serving two purposes. We cover most of Tanzania and Uganda. And again, we're 100% focused on equipment that increases client incomes. So very much in the productive space. And while we work currently with water pumps and fishing lights, we are definitely evaluating other agro value chain equipment, including processing and storage. I'll talk more to that later. Relevant to this panel, integrating with the value chains, the agro value chains, is essential to our client's success, and therefore our success. While water is maybe the most important thing for a farmer, they also need inputs like good seeds and fertilizer. Many of them need capacity support as they get involved with new types of crops, storage and transport, and ultimately market access. And that really last one, I'd say, is maybe the final frontier for us, that if you can provide access to a market, that really gives a farmer the confidence to make the investments in their farming, including in irrigation. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Michael. And then over to you, Natalie. Natalie, I can hear you. I think you might be on mute. Yeah, so just briefly. Yeah, 3 to 4 minutes, please.
Yes, I'll put my little timer on here. Good evening, everyone from Nairobi, Kenya. I'm Natalie Topa, and I'm the Regional Resilience and Livelihoods Coordinator for the Danish Refugee Council in East Africa and Great Lakes. And I wanted to talk a little bit about a different perspective with regards to solar and the role that solar can have in design. I'm a permaculture trainer and designer, among other things, and I bring a very strong systems-based design thinking to our food security projects within East Africa. And that means also integrating with agroecology, agroforestry. So what I want to ask, the energy and solar sector is, can we think about, all of the different kinds of roles that solar can play? And specifically, I mean about the hardware. So there's so many opportunities to look at solar hardware and all the different kinds of roles that it can have. So for example, if we think about solar panels, oftentimes solar farms are established and they create a total dead space. They cover the land, they're low to the ground, they kill vegetation, and they make that land utterly unusable. And there's a huge opportunity to shift that thinking and actually create a design element with solar infrastructure and hardware. So in this first slide, I'm just looking at taking some examples from a whole school of thought that's called agrivoltaics. So how do we integrate this equipment and this infrastructure into the design and integrated design of a farm system or a household system? So for example, if we ask ourselves, what functions can solar systems serve aside from the obvious? And how do we optimize stack functions and apply systems design thinking to that hardware? What role can solar infrastructure play in agro-ecosystem restoration? So, for example, if you look at solar panels and the hardware, that can provide shade for crops, for houses, for water tanks. It can provide shelter for animals, small, large animals, even fishery systems and poultry. They provide a hardscape that can, harvest water, and that can be captured as well. And even the towers and poles can be used for vertical growing, for climbing vegetables and, things like that. They can provide a wind block and a sun block, especially on the west side. The west evening sun is the hottest, most burning sun. So if we can include those hardware systems on the west side to provide shade for crops or houses, that can add a whole nother new function to that infrastructure. And then looking at also how do you create little microclimates for growing food? So in lieu of shade nets and things like that, how can this hardware be used to provide microclimates that can be part of an integrated pest and integrated disease management system? So those are some examples there. If we move to the next slide, even in urban areas, we can think about how to apply, sorry, next slide, Victor. The next slide, yeah, thank you. So, even in the urban realm, my background is actually urban and regional planning. And so thinking about, how can we integrate this hardware into the urban design to create more livable, walkable placemaking. So, things like bus bays and bus shelters, pedestrian shelters, parking lots and things like that. And I love on this lower left-hand side, there's an example of the water panels, which are not only, the solar panels, which also have been designed to create a water harvesting structure. So there's so much kind of innovation that can happen within the design. Even in the urban areas, rural areas, if you're talking about marketplaces, how can we position those to create shade over, perishable vegetables in market kiosks, things like that. So if we move on to the next slide. In our programs, we do focus very much on systems-based design, permaculture-based design, agroecology, and agroforestry. So, what I see all the time is that farmers invest money to get solar water pumped, and then their crop practices are totally antithetical to that investment. So what I mean by that is, if you look at those top photos, this is conventional agriculture done with chemical farming. All chemicals are, even including fertilizers, are absolute poison. They create soil erosion. And what we do is focus on agroecological methods that show farmers how to naturally build the fertility of the soil and protect it from evaporation. So those top two examples are just, that's how you get evaporation onto your crops. Monocropping, monocultures, only planting one thing, tilling land, having no shade and microclimates with treed systems, and no mulch. That soil is completely naked. Of course, the water is going to evaporate. So you can have an investment in solar water pumping, and then 90% of your water evaporates because you're not doing cover crops, you're not doing mulch, and creating that absorptive sponge in the soil. So if you look down below, when we start to talk about permaculture design and integrating polyculture and companion planting relationships, along with passive water harvesting. So what I do in my organization is I train farmers, government, our staff in how to do passive harvesting of water and of nutrients. So these last two photos are examples of how we work with the community to do many different types of earthworks and stoneworks to slow, spread, and sink water into the soil. The soil is the largest and cheapest water storage tank that exists. So if I had a solar company, what I would do is say, here are the products that we can bring for irrigation, but we definitely want to come with a whole package of interventions, design thinking of how do we passively harvest and store water in soils, how do we build soil fertility naturally and organically without any harmful chemicals, and using mulch, blocking what I call the three thieves of sun. The three thieves of sun are three thieves of of water are sun, wind, and slope. So everything about this design, where a solar system comes, should think about how to block all of those thieves of water. And then lastly, I wanted to say that, as people that work in the water sector and, energy sector as well, it is our responsibility to add more water into the groundwater system than we are taking out. If we're not doing that, we are actively contributing to drought and ecological degradation. So one thing that we're doing at DRC is increasingly doing borehole recharge plans. So we have an ecological recharge plan using trees, passive water harvesting earthworks, either with machines or labor intensive, to make sure that the solar is part of a system-based design that is increasing the absorptive capacity of soil, building soil fertility naturally, organically, and then that solar pumped water can come into a well-designed system and really optimize every single drop that is pumped out of water that farmers are paying good money for. So thanks a lot. Looking forward to the questions.
Great. So I was just about to tell your time was up. But yeah, thanks so much, Natalie. I think it's great, all the insights that has been shared from the different, the different perspectives, from finance down to sustainable design. I know that East Africa is the frontier, when it comes to productive use, but then also looking at the market in other regions, West Africa and Southern Africa as well. And just before I delve into specific questions, which please just under the time limit, 3 minutes, just to 3 minutes to answer that. Each participant, I think you're free to pose any questions so far on the chat box. Also on Slido, I think Victor, my colleague, would put the meeting code on the chat box as well. Yeah, so just please feel free to ask any specific questions to any of the panelists. I'll start with you, Crystal, and I will just go straight to it. One of the key challenges you mentioned is access to finance. Access to finance both on the supply side, so in terms of finance for companies, and access to finance on the consumer side for farmers. And just directly, how do we address this financing gap, especially how do we unlock local finance?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Just to dive in, as I mentioned up top, the key challenge here is most of the productive use appliances are quite large, are really high upfront costs, and farmers' ability to pay or even willingness to pay for these is quite low. So hence the disparity. There's some models, and I'll start with the demand side for what's happening with actually trying to get consumers. On the consumer financing side, we've seen a number of models that are seeing some success. So one is the pay-as-you-go model, similar to what we've seen with home systems. So reducing the upfront cost, payment is spread over time. The issue here with the traditional pay-go model, however, is that payments are required regularly, whereas farmers' incomes are quite seasonal. So there's a mismatch between when payments are required and when farmer incomes have income to spare. So what we're encouraging, and what we're seeing also some companies try out now, is experimenting with flexible payment plans that spread client payments over time, over a year or 2 years, into seasonal versus monthly payments that better match their income and expenditure patterns. I think the further innovation for that as well is also just thinking about what the default policy can be in the pay-go model, because usually for lighting is you'll switch off if there's disconnection when someone doesn't pay. But lighting and productive use are two different aspects, especially it's ineffective right now to disconnect, for example, with a solar water pump. If you're going to switch that off, they're not going to be able to then make more money if you're going to switch off a fridge and all their goods rot and whatnot. They won't be able to get the money to pay you back. And I think from some of the pilots that we've seen, almost about like 25% of the users are people who are middle class or wealthy. The rest are bottom of the pyramid. So from that perspective, we need to think about what kind of default policies make sense here, not usually the typical pay-as-you-go model disconnection. default policies. So thinking more on that side in terms of credit management. And then on, I think just moving away even from the water pumping, which I guess a lot of people are talking about, I think we've also seen PAYGO work for kiosks and like other things. I think the only thing we've not seen there, again, related to credit management is a lot of the companies are trying to upsell these products to residential customers versus the businesses based on some like credit sales repayment